This is the North Country Journal Hour, the radio show that gives you insight into daily life in Korea and Korea's rich history and culture. It also highlights the U.S. Army's history here in Korea, along with other topics of interest to Area 1 soldiers, airmen, civilians, and family members. I'm Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford, and on each edition of the North Country Journal Hour, we hear from Mr. Frank Fisher, the creator of the North Country Journal radio commentaries and editor of the North Country Journal Hour, the hour that brings you a deeper look into the topics of those 2-minute commentaries that air here on AFN Casey the Eagle. Now here's the 2-minute commentary that today's broadcast will expand on.
This is the North Country Journal with Frank Fisher.
One of my favorite things about Korea is its subway system and those silver gray trains with the blue and orange doors. They run between here in Area 1 and Korea's vibrant high-rise capital, Seoul. The line that comes up through Area 1 is the number 1 line. It's low cost and quick. It'll get you, for example, from the Camp Red Cloud area to Seoul in about an hour. But the subway isn't just a good way to get around. It's a great way to get the feel of this country you're stationed in. On the metro, you see Korea's dynamic, hardworking people up close. Young and middle-aged alike, occupied with their cutting-edge smartphones. Others, so tired their eyes close almost the moment they get into a seat. And as the train rushes down the line, you see, out the window, passing glimpses of mountain vistas and the busy streets of Korea's cities, big and small. Even the station names impart the feel of Korea: Jiheng, Hwaryong, Mangwolsa. But what I like most of all is looking out the window at Korea's towns and cities after dark. The storefronts pulsing with neon signs, ice blue, lime green, purple, and those distant crosses glowing red-orange on the steeples of churches. That's Korea. So while you're stationed here, don't waste your chance to get out and see this country. Take a ride on the metro. It's more than just a subway ride. It's an education.
And that was the North Country Journal from Frank Fisher, the writer-editor with the USAG Red Cloud and Area 1 Public Affairs Office.
Now for the fuller story, here's Mr. Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. I've been especially looking forward to today's North Country Journal Hour broadcast because it's about one of the things I like most about Korea, the Seoul Metro subway system. But first I should point out right off the bat one simple thing for our listeners, especially those who may be new to Korea. And that is that the number 1 line is the one and only line that gets us here in Warrior Country down to Seoul and back. And of course that's a big deal for a number of reasons. Seoul is Korea's vibrant, bustling capital city. It's both the kind of New York City and Washington, D.C. put together of South Korea. A center of government, commerce, finance, news media and publishing, the arts and entertainment, a city with many prominent universities, a place known for its shopping districts, coffee shops, restaurants, museums, and a lot else of cultural and historical interest. During today's broadcast, I'll give you some practical tips on how to get around on the subway system. Things like what it costs, how long it takes between Seoul and here in Area 1, and I'll also say in some detail just what things about it make me like it so much that I want you to know about it too. I'll have more on all of this when we're back from the break.
Getting you back into the music, here's Gym Class Heroes on AFN. Fighter right here on AFN Casey the Eagle, and we're back with the North Country Journal Hour, and here's Frank Fisher.
Thank you, Sergeant Crawford. We're talking today about the Seoul Metro subway and its number 1 line, which is the one that gets you between here in Area 1 and the nation's capital of Seoul. Well, here are some helpful basics about the number 1 line. It's clean, modern, and efficient, and it'll get you there and back in good time. Say, for example, you get the train at a Uijeongbu station. It'll get you to Seoul in a little less than an hour. And if you're coming from Bosan Station near Camp Casey in Dongducheon, add maybe an extra half hour to the trip. So, within an hour and a half, you can get from Area 1 to Korea's bustling capital. And it costs very little. From Uijeongbu in Korean money, and I know this is going to sound like a lot of money, it's 1,650 won. Yeah, I know, sounds like a lot, that word thousand in there. But in U.S. money, that's only a bit more than $1.50. From near Camp Casey in Korean money, 2,050 won, which in U.S. money is about $2.50. The subway cars are modern, and the trains run on time. As the train approaches a station, you hear the name of the station announced over the PA system in Korean and English, and for certain major stations, they're also announced in Chinese and Japanese. There are ticket machines in the stations, and they're very easy to use. You probably need someone to show you how to do it maybe the first time or two, but once you get the hang of it, it's easy. The machines have touch screens, and you can touch an icon that shows you the station names in English. And if you want help using the ticket machine, you can ask one of the station employees. Many of them speak at least enough English to help you out. And if you want a map showing you all the stations in the system, not just the number 1 line, but all lines, they're usually available at information counters in train stations in Seoul. And you can even download a free mobile app for your smartphone, and it has an interactive subway map. It shows you all stops on all lines in the metro system. But let's say you want to see just one of the lines, just those stations. Let's say the number 1 line that's of concern to us here in Warrior Country. Well, you can click on it, and it'll show you those stations in just that line. Makes it a little easier to find what you're looking for. You can even use the app to check the arrival times of individual trains, though to use the app you'd probably need to know at least some Korean. My Korean friends are very adept at using it. They navigate their way through very easily, and they can tell you how many minutes away a particular train is from where you are. Which brings me to one of the most important things I want you to know about the Seoul Metro system. It does not run 24 hours. In New York City, for example, most of the vast subway system there runs 24/7, literally. You know, New York, the city that never sleeps. Well, it's somewhat different here in Korea. So if you go to Seoul and want to come back here to Warrior Country, the last train rolling out of Seoul leaves at 11:38 at night. And if you're wanting to go from Uijeongbu down to Seoul, the last train leaves at 11:08 at night. So you will want to keep an eye on the time. Otherwise, you might have to find a taxi to get you back up here, and it can take you a while to get one and cost you quite a lot for the fare. One other important thing you should know, the system is especially crowded on weekends. That's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a fact. This is true from Friday night through Sunday night. The weekend, after all, is the weekend, whether you live in Manhattan or Seoul or right here in Area 1. So if, let's say, you're off on a weekday and you board the train not during morning or evening rush hour, but in between, chances are you can easily get a seat between Area 1 and Seoul. The weekend, though, is a different story. Chances are you and a lot of other people will be standing all the way. The one time when that changes is when you're coming back from Seoul on your way to Uijeongbu or Dongducheon. The closer the train gets to where we are, the Uijeongbu or Dongducheon, the more empty seats there begin to be. The North Country Journal Hour will return right after the break.
And I'll be right back with your weather exchange rate and gas prices. Right here on AVN Case of the Eagle, where we're serving America's best, we're back with the North Country Journal Hour, and here's Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. If you're just joining us, we're talking today about the subway line that gets you between here in Warrior Country and the city of Seoul, South Korea's capital. The line that does that is the number 1 line. It's those silver-gray trains with the blue and orange doors. Before the break, I told you how the subway system is clean, modern, and efficient, and I gave you some practical tips on how to use the system. Now, I want to tell you about some things that are sort of my personal favorites, things that I enjoy when I ride the number 1 line, and that I think you'll enjoy too. One of them is that it's a great way to get the feel of the country, because you're right there among the people of Korea, sitting, standing, they're right next to you. You'll notice how they dress, you'll hear how their language sounds, you'll see their facial expressions and body language when they're talking to someone. And even if you don't know word one of Korean, just your own eyes, ears, and instincts for life and people will give you a certain impression of them and of this country. If you're in a city anywhere else, New York, Nairobi, Rome, Rio, Tokyo, or Beijing, if you have your eyes and ears open, you'll form distinct impressions of whatever place you're in. Well, same of course in Korea. Today's impressions of Korea and its people are tomorrow's memories of Korea and its people. It'll be a part of you for the rest of your life. So see it, take it in, make it a part of your experience of life and the world. Another thing, to me one of the very best things about the metro subway system, is that you see not only the people of Korea close up, right there in the subway car with you, but out the windows there's an endless parade of memorable images. It's yours just for the looking. You look out the window and you can see Korea's mountains lying on the horizon. In winter, brown and mostly leafless. The ground is hard and barren. You see sticking up out of the ground those brittle stems that used to be rice plants, but that have been plucked at harvest time. In summer months, the hillsides and rice fields are a deep, rich green, and the wide open sky is big and blue. But through the windows, you also get great views of the cities and towns. If you stand close to the doors or windows, where you can peer down at a steep angle, you see the cars, the people, the streets, the signs, the buses. You see the hustle and bustle, not only of the bigger cities, but of the smaller towns that the train passes through. Those smaller towns and cities are every bit as much a part of Korea as the big cities. And you see how the streets are laid out, and the storefronts and coffee shops. I like seeing all this at any time of day or night, but my favorite time to see Korea from the subway is after dark. The traffic lights and the thousands of neon signs in lime green, purple, ice blue, many different colors, and off in the distance, seemingly in whatever direction you look, are those steeples of the churches with thin neon crosses that glow red-orange against the night sky. And there are the hikers. One of the things you'll probably see if you ride on the weekends is dozens and dozens of healthy-looking, middle-aged Korean men and women in hiking gear. I think of them as a kind of middle-aged infantry. You can't miss them with their bush hats, backpacks, and colorful bandanas, hiking boots, hiking pants, jackets, and they have a look of sturdy good health and usually a cheerful, positive expression. And the people I'm talking about typically look to be in their 40s, 50s, but make no mistake, in their 60s too, and probably older in some cases. Oh yes, a good many in their 60s. That's not at all unusual for Korea's enthusiastic hikers and its exercise-oriented culture. It's also one of the things I especially like about Korea, and that I especially like about the #1 subway line. The hikers, by the way, are heading to or from one of the many mountains that are very popular hiking venues in Area 1. Korea, of course, is a mountainous country. In virtually any direction you look, you can see mountains on the horizon. Here in Area 1, there are a number of mountains very popular with hikers: Soyosan, Dobongsan, Suraksan, which brings me to another interesting thing that I think makes the subway very educational in a sense: the names of the stations. Just hearing them adds to your feel of this country. It's said that language carries culture, and you can hear it in names like Bosan, Jiheng, Dokge, Nogyang, Uijeongbu, Hweryong, Mangwolsa, Dobongsan. So those are some of the many things I like about the #1 subway line, and we'll have some final thoughts after the break.
We're back with the North Country Journal Hour, and here's Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. Well, now some final thoughts about the #1 line of the Seoul Metro subway system, but also about some things that are related to that, but go a little bit beyond it, too. I'm going to draw on my own experience now as a soldier back during the Cold War era. I hope you've heard of that. And my experience living here in Korea to say something that I think will benefit you. And I say it especially to our young soldiers and airmen here in Area 1. And that is, don't waste the great chance you have while you're here in Korea to get out and see this country. I said a little bit about this in an earlier segment, but now I really want to say a few important things about this to really kind of get the point home. Here's what I mean. For a lot of young soldiers and airmen, the Army or the Air Force is the first time they've been anywhere outside the United States. This is true, actually, of many service members, regardless of branch. And for many, it may even be the first time they've been outside their home state. Before I enlisted in the Army, I had been to a number of states in my region of the country, but I'd never been overseas. Well, I was a young soldier and an NCO years back, and I enlisted partly because I hoped I'd get to have a lot of adventure, a lot of action, and get to see the world. And in 4 exciting, eventful, rewarding years in uniform, I got to see 10 different countries in Europe and Asia, just because I was in uniform, because I was a soldier. Now here you are in Korea at a relatively early time in your life, and if you go ahead and make the most of this great chance you have, it'll shape you and benefit you in ways that you may or may not realize right now, but that will be something you're really grateful for later on. Having gotten to see other countries while I was in the Army has benefited me again and again and again in many different ways. And it can be the same for you who are stationed in Korea now because, there's a big difference between having experienced something and having not experienced it, right? Your being here gives you a chance to experience something that's different from what you know back home. And that's important because it's a very big world, and more it's an interconnected world, as you know. What happens in one country far away can have big effects on people in other countries, and that definitely includes us back in America. Before you got out of your hometown or home state, that's probably what you knew, at least firsthand, in person. But once you got out, you saw, okay, the way things are where I grew up aren't necessarily the way they are in other parts of the world. And when you come to Korea, you're seeing an entire nation, an entire culture that's different, at any rate, from what you knew at home. And this isn't just a matter of seeing things that are different and interesting. All that's good, of course, but there are even deeper benefits. Let's say you're a young soldier, young service member, and later you raise children. The fact that you've been overseas, that you've been here in Korea, helps you to broaden your own children. Your smarts, your know-how, where you've been, what you've seen, all that becomes a part of who you are. And through you, it can get passed on to your children and can go into helping make them the people that they're going to become and the kind of well-rounded people that you want them to be. You draw on your experiences, the ones you've had being here, let's say, and you're able to tell your children about what it's like in another country. And you're not speaking from something that you've heard merely, but that you've experienced firsthand. Another thing worth mentioning is that your being in Korea can also help you as a citizen. Because in the course of your lifetime, especially when, for instance, candidates for office are talking about our country's relations with other countries and the policies they think are best, or members of Congress are working on a piece of legislation that involves our relations with other countries, I think you'll find that just by having served overseas, by having been in another country, your instincts might be a little sharper and you might be a little more knowing as to whether what you're hearing is sound, realistic thinking, or maybe not so sound. And so it is then that for all those reasons, I remind you one more time, make the most of your time while you're serving here and get out and see Korea. It is a broadening experience. And yes, today's impressions of Korea and its people are tomorrow's memories of Korea and its people. See it, take it all in. It'll be a part of you for the rest of your life. The North Country Journal Hour airs every other Thursday at 3 p.m. Our next broadcast is 2 weeks from now, Thursday, March 31st, here on AFN-KC. I'm Frank Fisher of the Area 1 Public Affairs Office, and I'm editor of the North Country Journal Hour, handing back now to my North Country Journal Hour broadcast partner, AFN-KC DJ, Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford. Thanks for joining us. Here's Sergeant Crawford.
And as Mr. Fisher said, thanks for joining us for this edition of the North Country Journal Hour, and I'll be right back with your weather, exchange rate, and gas prices.